Alright, look, we all know Uncle Iroh is a nice guy, a sweet old man, and the father we all wish we had. You clicked on this video, so you already knew all that. But there's a lot of things about him that aren't immediately obvious. Things you only pick up on when you rewatch the entirety of Avatar: The Last Airbender purely to look out for the Uncle Iroh bits and analyzes every action and every piece of dialogue. Kinda like I just did. Let's start with how he deliberately sabotages Zuko's hunt for the Avatar. What? That's not a thing that ever happens in an episode. No, it doesn't. Not directly anyways. And that's what makes it so beautifully crafted and subtle. Sometimes there's a danger of reading too much into fiction that wasn't there. But in this case, I think this is genuinely the masterful creation of a realistic character. You see, when you watch ATLA for the first time, you think Uncle Iroh is just some silly old dude, a comic relief character. So when he does goofy things that accidentally cause Zuko trouble, you don't think too hard about it. You laugh it off and move on. But knowing that he's so much more than that, I realized something in my latest rewatch. If you look at Uncle Iroh's contributions in almost all of Book 1 of Avatar, he is mostly there to slow down and disrupt Zuko's attempts to catch Aang. I'm gonna start with the best example and then go from there to build a picture of what I'll call weaponized incompetence. After which, we're gonna analyze every facet of Uncle Iroh's personality and many things that even I missed until now. And so we've got to start by talking about Uncle Iroh's missing White Lotus tile. Weaponized incompetence is a term that refers to when someone deliberately pretends to be bad or incapable at something. Usually, in order to get other people to do the work instead. It's like being in a group project and pretending you don't know how PowerPoint works, so someone else has to make the slideshow. But that's obviously not Uncle Iroh's goal. Instead, Uncle Iroh pretends to be an airhead and a goofball because it A, makes his enemies underestimate him, and B, it allows him to mask some of his smarter power plays. We'll talk about that first one later, but let's talk about that second one now. In Book 1, Chapter 9, the episode titled The Waterbending Scroll, Team Avatar stop at a local trading port and happen upon a waterbending scroll that Katara steals in order to teach Aang, and more importantly herself, some advanced waterbending techniques. In the meantime, we cut to Prince Zuko, who is busy training, only to be interrupted when the ship suddenly changes course. Angry, as he so often is early on in the show, he confronts the helmsman to ask him why he changed course away from their hunt for the Avatar. In response, he's told by his Uncle Iroh that actually, he is the one who ordered the change of course and says, "I assure you, it is a matter of utmost importance." Zuko asks if it's something to do with the Avatar, and Iroh tells him that it's even more important than the hunt for the Avatar. Take a mental note of that, because that's not an accidental choice of words. And Iroh reveals that he's lost his White Lotus towel and wants to detour to the nearest port to look for a new one. Begrudgingly, Zuko agrees. A while later, we see that they've scoured the entire port and not found any hint of the White Lotus, to which Zuko yells that it's good to know that this trip was a complete waste of time for everyone. And Iroh, in traditional Iroh fashion, simply says it wasn't a waste of time because he bought a bunch of other random crap instead. Then, as if that wasn't enough of a waste of time, Iroh drags Zuko to yet another ship to look for some woodwinds for music night at the ship. Of course, as fate would have it, this turns out to be the same ship that Katara had stolen the waterbending scroll from, and the pirates who own it are looking for her and Aang, which Zuko overhears. The two parties team up and track down Team Avatar, only for a comedic scuffle to break out when Sokka gets the pirates to turn on Zuko by revealing that this is the Avatar whose bounty would fetch a lot more than what that waterbending scroll is worth. Eventually, the gang make a last-minute escape off a waterfall and onto Appa while Zuko's boat is wrecked. As Zuko is watching on in frustration, Iroh now makes a dramatic reveal, one that he thinks is quite hilarious.
Prince Zuko, you're really going to get a kick out of this. The lotus tile was in my sleeve the whole time!
Now, as I mentioned before, when you watch The Last Airbender for the first time, you're inclined to think that this was a genuine goof from Iroh, who's just a bit of a senile old man. But a repeat viewer should start to get suspicious. Iroh is not a legendary fighter for nothing. He is shrewd, calculating, and on top of that, we know how important that specific tile is to him. Not only is it a symbol of his membership of the elite White Lotus Club, but it's also a key of sorts that allows him to make contact with other members should he need it, as he does in a later episode in Book 2. Put all that together and it becomes very clear. This was no accident. Iroh didn't accidentally misplace one of his most important possessions only to clumsily realize it was in his sleeve the whole time. This was a calculated plan, one done to derail Zuko. Now the question you'll be asking is why? Why would he do something against the wishes of the beloved nephew he spends the entire show supporting? And don't worry, he's got a good reason. But before we talk about why, I need to prove to you that this isn't some one-off incident. If this was the only time something like this happens, some viewers would accuse me of reaching, of overreading into one minor example. But as I said, this is a pattern of calculated behavior. In Book 1, Chapter 7, Iroh is taking a bath in a hot spring when Zuko turns up and tells him they've gotta go. Iroh stalls for time, and eventually, Zuko sets him a deadline that he needs to be back in the ship in half an hour. Iroh ignores this and takes a nap, waking up what appears to be several hours later. This, of course, is when he's attacked by earthbenders and taken hostage, and we'll talk about that part later on in this video. What's important for now is that he not only once, but twice, rejects Zuko's urgency and slows him down on purpose. Book 2, Chapter 11, Iroh whines about his aching old body until Zuko is forced to stop and make camp. Book 1, Chapter 3, Zhao wants to host them, but Zuko refuses, saying he's gotta go, only for Iroh to accept the offer and make them spend the day there. Even Book 1, Chapter 1, one of the first interactions we see in the show between Iroh and Zuko is when Zuko is training and gets sick of the current moveset he's being made to practice. He demands to be taught more advanced moves, to which Uncle Iroh tells him that he's being impatient and needs to practice his basics. Zuko, obviously not one to accept that answer, puts his foot down that Iroh must teach him right now. Iroh, in his typical way, acquiesces and says, "Very well, but first, I must finish my roast duck." Even in these small little interactions, even if it's just for a day, an hour, a few minutes, Iroh is constantly trying to slow Zuko down. So now let's talk about why. There's two major reasons. Firstly, there's the big picture reason. Iroh, unlike almost everyone in the Fire Nation hierarchy, does not believe in capturing the Avatar, or the whole conquest of the world thing either. We know that he's enlightened, and as we'll talk about in later sections, he's traveled the world learning from and cooperating with people from all four nations. He knows the importance of balance and harmony, both physically and spiritually. So I think he generally doesn't want anyone to capture the Avatar. But there is a reason he doesn't want specifically Zuko to capture the Avatar, and we learn it subtly in Book 1, Chapter 12. In this episode, Zuko's crew are worried about a storm and want to turn back, but he doesn't, which leads to an angry confrontation between him and his lieutenant. Eventually, Iroh diffuses the situation and then decides to tell the crew in private the reason why Zuko is the way he is, and why he was banished. This is, of course, one of the great Avatar episodes, where we learn that Zuko was punished by his father simply for speaking out of turn in a war meeting, made to fight Ozai and Agni Kai, and then scarred and banished for refusing to fight his father. After retelling the story, Iroh adds one more thing to the crew, and this seemingly simple line reveals a lot about both Iroh and Zuko's psychology. Things will never return to normal, but the Avatar gives Zuko hope. You see, Iroh knows that what happened to Zuko can never be erased. Even if he captures the Avatar and returns home with his honor restored, as he believes it will not change what his father did or what kind of person Fire Lord Ozai is. There will never be a normal for Zuko. And more than that, he knows that this path will not lead to Zuko's internal satisfaction. Capturing the Avatar will not make Zuko happy or fulfilled as a person. But here's the problem that Iroh finds himself in. He may know this, but Zuko doesn't. And try as he might, he's failed so far to subtly guide Zuko to that same conclusion. His nephew is so tunnel visioned on capturing Aang that he's kind of like a dog chasing its own tail, more concerned about the pursuit than thinking even for a second about what he'll do when he finally catches it. Even if it's futile, it gives Zuko hope. We'll talk more about these themes of hope and Iroh not wanting to force his ideals on Zuko in more detail in a later section when we talk about Iroh's philosophy. But Iroh knows that this goal that Zuko has is what's keeping him from falling into despair. Without the hunt for the Avatar, Zuko at this point in time would have nothing to live for, and Iroh cannot have that. So he is left with seemingly one choice: to stall. He can't stop Zuko from hunting the Avatar, but he also can't let him succeed. So he's trying to subtly sabotage his nephew's pursuit of Aang in the hopes that, somewhere along the way, Zuko will come to a greater realization about himself, his place in the world, and the balance of the four nations. When this clicked in my brain, Uncle Iroh's actions make complete sense, and his seeming incompetence is just a way of him masking his agenda, an agenda that he can't openly discuss with his nephew. Not yet. In a way, Uncle Iroh is proven both right and wrong. He's wrong in that eventually Zuko does get everything he wanted. He returns home with his honor restored and regains the love and respect of his father Ozai, whatever that's worth. So there is a new normal for Zuko. But where he's wholeheartedly vindicated is in the fact that this does not fulfill Zuko. And indeed, with time, Zuko comes to this realization himself and finds the right path, even if it does come with more struggle and turmoil than Iroh would have liked for him. Of course, this weaponized incompetence doesn't just apply to Iroh's relationship with Zuko. Iroh uses it to fool others too. The best example of this comes from the episode titled The Spirit World, which is the episode we already mentioned, where Iroh is captured by Earth Kingdom soldiers while bathing in a hot spring. First, as they criticize Iroh for his siege of Ba Sing Se, he pretends to be a tired, sleepy old man and falls off the horse he's being transported on. Of course, this is just a cover to allow him to leave behind his slipper, which he knows Zuko will find. Then later, he pretends to have weary old bones that hurt from the chains being too loose that currently bind him. Of course, when the soldier comes to adjust them, Iroh springs into action and burns the soldier's hand so that he can use the chaos to try and escape. This is the perfect encapsulation of why Iroh behaves the way he does. By keeping up this image of himself as a hapless, stupid, frail old man, he lulls everyone around him into seeing him as incapable of doing anything, whether that's planning a strategy or fighting his way out of trouble. And it allows him to choose when he wants to let out his deeper self and who he wants to show it to. Now there is another layer to this still, because as cunning as Uncle Iroh can be, he also at times can be genuinely very stupid. The best two examples of this both come from Book 2. Firstly, in Chapter 2, The Cave of the Two Lovers, Iroh and Zuko have recently become fugitives and are learning to fend for themselves in the wild. Iroh stumbles upon a white flower, and he's unsure if it's either a plant that makes for delicious tea or if it's poisonous and could kill him. After Zuko leaves him to go fishing, he returns to find that his uncle has consumed the plant and found out the hard way that it was not tea. Iroh responds by saying he's got good news. He's found some berries that either cure him of this poison or make him go blind. So tired of these gambles, Zuko drags Iroh to a local doctor who kindly treats and feeds the pair. So if it wasn't for Zuko here and the kind strangers, Iroh would be dead. But this isn't the only time a thirst for good tea lands Iroh in trouble. The other example of Iroh doing something genuinely stupid comes from Book 2, Chapter 13, The Drill. As he and Zuko are waiting for transport into Ba Sing Se, Iroh orders some tea, which is disgustingly cold. So without thinking too much about it, Iroh heats the tea up himself, a fact that is noticed by none other than Jet, who is also hoping to find a new life in Ba Sing Se. Zuko, upon realizing this, slaps the tea out of Iroh's hand and tells him, "For a wise old man, that was a pretty stupid move." Iroh, still not realizing the gravity of the situation, just starts crying over the spilt tea. I think this is what makes Iroh such a fascinating character to analyze, because sometimes it's impossible to tell which side of him you're seeing. Sometimes when he's being dumb and overly simplistic, you get the feeling that it's just an act he's putting on. And then at other times, he genuinely is a goofball who is easily distracted by food, tea, and pretty women. More on that later. Perhaps the truth is that Iroh is all these things, as real people are too. We're sometimes two contradictory things at once, and that's what makes him feel like such a real and well fleshed out person. But that's also why we have to talk about another conflicting side of Iroh, and how, much like Zuko, he too has a troubled past. We have to talk about Iroh the Warmonger. Of all the pieces of information we get about Uncle Iroh, there's one single scene that, in my mind, is the most important and also the most shocking that we see in Avatar: The Last Airbender. In this scene from Book 2, Chapter 7, Zuko Alone, which, by the way, is my favorite episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I talk about why in detail in the video you see flashing up on screen right now. If you've enjoyed this video, I think you'll like that one too, or this video essay on Zuko's redemption arc that I did as well. Actually, while you're here and have seen at least this much of this video, I'd like to make a humble request of you. If you've enjoyed this content, then would you consider supporting me directly on Patreon? As you can see, my videos do not have sponsors from brands because, well, I just don't believe in selling you shady products in order to make money. It might sound douchey, but I do kind of believe in the sanctity of this art. But to keep this channel going as my full-time job, I do need money, and that can be hard to make ends meet purely off of YouTube revenue. Especially because a lot of the media I cover is often stuff that gets flagged for copyright really frivolously. While researching this video, my previous upload on Studio Ghibli's Arrietty was taken down for a copyright battle that I had to fight to win. And anytime a video goes down, all my revenue goes down with it. Meaning that it can be pretty scary trying to make this dream of mine stay afloat. Videos like this one take weeks and sometimes months to make. Especially this one when I had to go through so much raw footage. So if you'd be so kind as to support content like mine, then Patreon is the best place to do so. Alternatively, you can drop a one-time PayPal donation, the links to all of which are in the video description. But if you cannot, then that is no problem at all. I'm very grateful for just your view, and I hope you'll continue to give me that view here or on any of my previous videos or on my Twitch channel where I stream for fun. Now, back to Uncle Iroh. If you're a fan of Iroh, what you're about to see may be disturbing footage. Not because it's graphic or adult, but because it's so completely at odds with the sweet, woke Iroh we know and love. In this scene from Zuko's flashback, we see his mother reading a letter that Iroh has sent from the warfront, where he is currently leading a 600-odd day siege of the walls of Ba Sing Se. And what he says is not good.
I hope you all may see it someday. If we don't burn it to the ground first.
After telling the family that the wall is a sight to behold, and that he hopes the city inside is as beautiful, Iroh proceeds to brag about how he may well end up burning the whole thing to the ground, and then laughs about it evilly. Just to be clear here, Iroh is bragging not only about destroying a historic city, but presumably about the many people who will probably be killed, or at the very least have their lives ruined, by the whole thing. Of course, we also see later that Iroh learns his son Lu Ten has died during the siege, and as a consequence, becomes completely broken, abandons the conquest, and begins down the path to becoming a better person. Now, there is a slight problem with this scene, beyond how horrible Iroh is being, in that even though this flashback is meant to seem ancient, it's actually only 6 years before the events of the show. It truly must have been a rough 6 years because somehow Iroh aged rapidly and had all his hair turned grey in that time. Or maybe he was dyeing it before and stopped after this, who knows. But I'm not one of those people who thinks that the specifics of a timeline are as important as the sentiment being conveyed. The point isn't to literally trace how in 6 short years, Iroh went from this pretty standard evil Fire Nation guy to being the gentle, kind man that we know him to be. What's important is that he gets there. And how. One of the key things we know about Iroh's journey is this idea of destiny. It's one he talks about a lot in the show, and specifically, reinventing your own destiny. If you watch the show, you will definitely have a lot of times where you think, man, Iroh puts up way too much with Zuko's horrible treatment of him. Even though I love Zuko, I still found it hard at times to tolerate the way he's rude, dismissive, or sometimes just degrading towards Iroh.
I think you are exactly what you seem. A lazy, mistrustful, shallow old man who's always been jealous of his brother.
And yet, every time, Iroh forgives him and continues to show him love and support. And I think one of the reasons why is this idea of destiny. Because if there's anyone in this world who understands what it's like to be a Fire Prince destined to become Fire Lord, it's Iroh. It's something that's really easy to forget, but for most of his life, even as I said, up to 6 years before the events of the show, Iroh was the Fire Prince. He was what Zuko is in the show. The oldest son, destined to inherit the throne and lead the Fire Nation on its glorious conquest of the world. And so I think Zuko is incredibly lucky, not only that his uncle was such a kind and empathetic guy, but also that he was the only person in the world who could possibly understand the burden that had been put upon him. Even Ozai would not know what it's like, who was more akin to having Azula's position, and the similarities there are self-evident. There's an Avatar scrapbook that released not too long ago called Legacy of the Fire Nation, which is written from Iroh's perspective and talks about how he spent his childhood and years as a young adult trying to desperately please his own father and grandfather, while being at times envious of his younger brother's ambition and ruthlessness, which felt more appropriate for his lineage. Now, when I'm talking about a movie or a film, I I don't like using affiliated media as part of my analysis or even my own understanding of the piece. I believe in analyzing what you see and hear, not what gets added at a later date. You only have to look at, for example, J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter series to see how an author can take a beloved piece of work and throw in random retcons and character details that either add nothing or even take away from the joy of the work. But even without that art book, it's not hard to imagine that Iroh would have grown up in a horrible environment in the same way that Zuko does. The court of the Fire Kingdom is clearly a place where anyone can be corrupted. I don't think the point of the story is that the Fire Nation and his people are singularly evil. Far from it. The point, at least as I see it, is that powerful people can easily manipulate others and create enemies where none exist. One of the greatest pieces of ambient storytelling in The Last Airbender comes in Book 3, Chapter 2, The Headband, when Aang infiltrates a Fire Nation school and realizes that the kids are being taught propaganda, completely wrong pieces of history that aim to indoctrinate them into believing that what the Fire Nation is doing is righteous and just. Of course, this is how both in real life and the show, you can get people growing up and becoming happily complicit in heinous acts of war. But now imagine you're growing up around the people who believe this most strongly, as Zuko and Iroh did, and you add to that a desire that every child has to please their parents. Well, it's a recipe for disaster. You can see how easily a young prince determined to show their worth would make extra effort to be cruel or aggressive to show what a great leader of the Fire Nation they'd be. But this brings us back to the idea of destiny, and that scene of Iroh bragging about sieging down the walls of Ba Sing Se. Uncle Iroh has some amazing quotes throughout the show, and I'll be quoting plenty in this video, but there's two that really stand out to me. One is from the finale, Sozin's Comet, when Iroh is gearing up to attack Ba Sing Se again, this time as a member of the White Lotus, trying to liberate it from the Fire Nation. He says, "When I was a boy, I once had a vision that I would one day take Ba Sing Se. Only now do I see that my destiny is to take it back from the Fire Nation so that the Earth Kingdom can be free again." For a long time, Iroh thought that it was his destiny to be the conquering, warmongering leader that his father expected him to be. He, better than anyone else, understands Zuko's position of how suffocating a destiny like that can be. He worked towards fulfilling that expectation. But this brings me to that second Uncle Iroh quote that summarizes the epiphany he clearly came to in his own journey and tries to impart to Zuko in turn. In Book 2, Episode 17, Lake Laogai, Iroh gets offered his own tea shop, but Zuko, not happy with a life-serving tea, tells Iroh that he wants his destiny. Iroh replies that what that means is up to you. Later, towards the end of the episode, Iroh finds Zuko in the underground chambers beneath Lake Laogai and confronts him about what he's doing here. Zuko is planning on stealing Appa, and the exchange he and Iroh have is incredible. Now believe me, if copyright law wasn't as shitty as it is, I would play this whole scene in full and let you appreciate the delivery of the lines yourself. But copyright on YouTube is shitty, and so that this video doesn't get taken down, I instead have to do a poor voice acting job with these quotes myself. Zuko barks at Iroh that, "I know my own destiny, uncle," to which Iroh replies, "Is it your own destiny? Or is it a destiny someone else has tried to force on you?" Zuko replies, "Stop it, uncle, I have to do this." Which is when Iroh gives him this poignant message. "I'm begging you, Prince Zuko, it's time for you to look inward and begin asking yourself the big questions. Who are you? And what do you want?" Again, I think on the surface, this could just come across as a wise uncle giving his nephew some good advice. But when you consider Iroh's past, you realize that this is almost like Iroh talking to a version of himself. A version he wished he had become sooner. It's like he wants to save Zuko from the same mistakes and wrong decisions that he made. To not be an old man before he finally realizes wrong from right. And so he asks him to consider the things that clearly he's had to wrestle with himself. Who are you? And what do you want? Is this your destiny, or is it a destiny that's been forced upon you? In this case, it works in the short term. Zuko frees Appa and returns with his uncle, having done the right thing for maybe the first time in his life. This is when Zuko goes through his metamorphosis fever and for a brief period behaves like a better version of himself. But of course, it doesn't last long. At the end of Book 2, Zuko is confronted with the choice to join Azula or help Team Avatar. And his uncle, again, tries to guide him to the right decision. Iroh tells him, "You are not the man you used to be, Zuko. You are stronger and wiser and freer than you have ever been. And now, you've come to the crossroads of your destiny. it's time for you to choose. It's time for you to choose good. The thing about Iroh is that, as we've seen, he never forces his will upon Zuko. He's clearly stronger as a fighter, and is elder, and military superior. He has many ways of basically making Zuko do what he wants to do, if he so chose. But that's not Iroh's way, not as a person, but also not philosophically. As we've spoken about, Iroh knows the pressure of other people deciding your destiny for you. And similarly, he's seen Zuko struggle to break free from the destiny that being the Fire Prince has put upon him. So he always just guides Zuko. He always tries to let him come to his own conclusions and make a choice that is truly his own. Decide and interpret his own destiny. Unfortunately, in this instance, Zuko makes the bad choice of joining sides with Azula to take down Aang. But just as it seems like he might finally capture the Avatar for good, or even kill him, it is none other than Uncle Iroh who steps in, warding off all attackers to allow Katara and Aang to escape. And this is not the first time he betrays the Fire Nation to protect the balance of the world. He's done it before at the end of Book 1, fighting Zhao and his goons to try and protect the Moon Spirit, which is what gets him labeled as a traitor in the first place. So the question is, why? What makes Iroh choose harmony and balance over his country? To answer that question, we need to talk about the way Uncle Iroh views the world. There is barely any explicit discussion in The Last Airbender about why and how exactly Iroh decided to reject the beliefs of the Fire Nation and change his ways. But we do know what started him down this path: the death of his son, Lu Ten, during the siege of Ba Sing Se, which by all accounts broke Iroh. It's strongly implied that not long after this, Iroh ventured into the spirit world in an attempt to find his son. In the last episode of Book 1, Iroh warns Zhao not to trifle with the spirits, to which Zhao replies in a condescending tone that he's heard rumors of Iroh's journey through the spirit world. Earlier in that season in episode 7, as Iroh is being transported by those earthbenders we spoke about before, he is the only person who sees the spirit of Aang flying by on a dragon, which is the sign of someone who's been to the spirit realm. So we don't know exactly what happened, but we can say pretty confidently that Iroh did in fact enter the spirit world in search of his son. After he returned, we presume he turned over a new leaf and dedicated himself to being better and learning more about the people of the other 3 nations. Still, that leaves the question of why. Why did the death of Lu Ten make him do this specifically? Well, there is something in the show that we can use to, I think, reasonably extrapolate why Iroh does what he does. It comes in one of those iconic Last Airbender episodes, Tales of Ba Sing Se. This is the episode where we get little glimpses from each of the characters' days and get to know them as individuals rather than as part of an ensemble. With Iroh, what we see and learn is that basically he's just a wonderful guy. Iroh is kind, empathetic, and basically saves, helps, or guides everyone he meets. First, he's out shopping when he politely helps the shopkeeper's flower, pushing it back into the shade where he knows it will grow better. On top of his kindness, it shows us how knowledgeable and cultured he is to know such a detail about this plant. Then he sees a crying boy and decides to play a song for him, not only cheering him up, but also showing us that he's not afraid to be goofy or even put himself in a potentially embarrassing situation if it means helping someone. Something he does throughout the show. After that, he sees some boys playing with a ball, and when they break someone's window, he gives them his usual sagely advice by telling them it is usually best to admit mistakes when they occur and to seek to restore honor. Though of course, when he sees how angry the guy is, he hightails it right alongside those kids, showing us he's both wise, but also not rigid in his beliefs, and just quite a funny guy. Finally, we get Iroh getting mugged. But as he confronts his attacker, who we know he could easily defeat, he surprises everyone, the mugger and us the audience, by lecturing him on his improper stance. Of course, in his Iroh way, he sits down to have tea and pleasant conversation with the guy and learns about his dreams of being a masseur. No one else had believed in his dream, and out of desperation, he had resorted to trying to mug people, with Iroh being his first. But with a little encouragement from Iroh, he finally feels that he can make his dream a reality, and he thanks Iroh for believing in him. Iroh responds by dropping another Iroh Pearl of Wisdom when he says, "While it is always best to believe in oneself, a little help from others can be a great blessing." Here we see another quality of Iroh's that we see throughout the show. He always tries to see the good in people. He knows better than anyone that people can change and deserve a second chance. And so he displays that philosophy by giving this mugger a chance to show that he too is really just a misguided soul who simply needed someone to believe in him. And that's a really beautiful message, I think. But finally, after all of this, we eventually get to the real point of the episode and this section of our video. After a whole day of being a lovely person, Iroh finds a quiet moment to go up to a scenic hill overlooking Ba Sing Se and build some sort of shrine. When the angle changes, we see who the shrine is for. "Happy birthday, my son," he says, before adding, "If only I could have helped you." Tears run down Iroh's face, and he begins to sing that same song he played for the crying kid earlier, but now with a completely different meaning. Brave soldier boy. Then, Iroh's episode ends with a touching frame that reads, "In honor of Mako," which references the voice actor Makoto Iwamatsu, also known as just Mako, who voiced Iroh and tragically passed away before this episode aired. And so I think we should take this moment as well to appreciate the incredible work he did and the inspiring legacy he left behind via the character of Uncle Iroh. But it is this line, "If only I could have helped you," that I think is the single most insightful line in the whole show to understand why Iroh behaves the way he does. It's just speculation on my part, but I believe that the loss of his son made Iroh feel helpless. As if to say that what would be the point of conquering Ba Sing Se or even the world if it meant losing the person he held most dear, his son. And I think understanding that pain, he began to wish that no one should have to go through a pain like this themselves or cause this pain to another person. That callous laugh that Iroh displays when he's bragging about burning Ba Sing Se to the ground, I think he realizes that that would bring 1,000 Lu Ten's worth of suffering to the people of the Earth Kingdom. And so Iroh dedicates his life to helping others, to being kinder, to being better, so that he can give other people what he couldn't give his son, a kind world, one where violence, military conquest, and senseless loss of life are not a thing anymore. This leads us to talk about Iroh's travels, or at least what we know of them. We don't know how many of these took place in the 6-year interim period or earlier on in his life, but we do know the end product. One of the most insightful lessons that Iroh has for Zuko is when he tells him about the 4 elements while teaching him how to redirect lightning, a technique he himself invented by observing waterbenders. Here we get yet another Uncle Iroh gem of wisdom, as he tells Zuko, "It is important to draw wisdom from many places. If you take it from only one place, it becomes rigid and stale. Understanding others, the other elements, and other nations will help you become whole." Of course, the bending stuff here is valuable to Zuko, but I think the personal philosophy is even more valuable. This idea that if you draw wisdom from only one place, it becomes rigid and stale is beautifully poignant for both Zuko's situation with the Fire Nation, but even us in real life. It's easy to get caught up in just one way of thinking and forget to take the perspective of other people, and Iroh reminds us to broaden our horizons. This is of course what he did, having gone on some travels to learn from waterbenders. Again, we're not sure when this happened or how long it took, but the key point is that Iroh has an understanding not just of waterbenders, but of all 4 nations, teaching Zuko about the people of every land and element. It feeds into this idea that understanding others will help you become whole. You see, while it's the job of the Avatar to keep the world in balance, what Iroh is saying here is that balance isn't just a political state in which the 4 nations are not at war. Everyone in the world of Avatar is off balance in some way because they lack an understanding of each other. The war has divided people and they've stopped understanding one another. And this is a theme we see throughout. The Water Tribe is living in isolated pockets. The Earth Kingdom famously is hiding behind its walls and pretending there's nothing going on outside. The Air Nomads were always isolated even before their genocide. And of course, the Fire Nation is most definitely not looking at the other nations with any attempt at understanding them. So it's not just the world that's broken, it's all its people as well. And Iroh is arguing here that we need to put in some extra effort to make ourselves whole, to go out of our way and break the expectations of our nations and unite with others, which is exactly what he does with the White Lotus organization. We learn that he's in fact the Grand Master of the organization, i.e. the leader, and considering how powerful all the benders are in the group, it makes it all the more impressive that they chose Iroh as their leader and shows what an incredible guy he is. In many ways, Iroh is the closest non-Avatar person to being the Avatar in the world of The Last Airbender. Much like Aang, Iroh makes his way across the globe and assembles a group of talented fighters from different nations and brings them together for one cause. He is spiritually enlightened, he understands balance, and seemingly has achieved it within himself, and he learns bending from other elements. He may not literally be able to earth or water bend, because that's a limitation that exists on non-avatars, but he uses their techniques and philosophy for inspiration to create new forms of bending himself. Not just the redirecting of lightning, Iroh also has his fire breath, which earned him the nickname of Dragon of the West, and is something he presumably learned from the Sun Warriors. That's another thing to mention here, Iroh's time with the Sun Warriors. We learn in Book 3, Episode 13, when Aang and Zuko seek the Sun Warriors for advice on firebending, that Iroh has been one of the few outsiders to ever make contact with this tribe. With them, he not only learned another approach to firebending, but also earned the approval of the two dragons that the Sun people refer to as the Masters of Firebending. We learned that Iroh told everyone he had killed the last of the dragons, but actually, that was just a lie made up to keep their existence a secret so that more people don't come hunting them. What it demonstrates is a theme that leads us nicely to our next section, which is that Iroh really doesn't care about what other people think about him. If something is right, he will do it, no matter what it may do to his reputation. We've already sort of mentioned this idea incidentally with the fact that Iroh doesn't mind playing the fool and doesn't mind if the Fire Nation brands him as a traitor. If he believes it's the right way to be or right thing to do, he is completely unbothered by these labels. The Sun Warrior example is another such case where Iroh doesn't mind having a reputation of being an evil killer of dragons if it means protecting the dragons themselves. But the most moving testament to this philosophy is Iroh's response to being in poverty and exile. Early in Book 2, as Iroh and Zuko are forced to flee as fugitives across the Earth Kingdom, Zuko struggles massively with the way they live. That being day to day, no money, scraping together food however and whenever they can. But Iroh seems to barely mind and takes to life in poverty very quickly. For example, in Chapter 4, they're forced to beg on the street for coins. But while Zuko is visibly annoyed and humiliated, Iroh doesn't seem to mind at all. He's smiling, compliments a lady on her smile, and then dances and sings for a gold piece. Zuko again is annoyed, and at the end of this episode, we see him enact vengeance on this guy by stealing his swords, which he later uses to become the Blue Spirit again in that Lake Laogai episode we mentioned earlier in this video. But Iroh actually praises the guy and says, "Such a kind man," when the guy leaves. Again, I think this shows perfectly the contrast in how these two view the world. Zuko is the definition of entitled. He believes the Fire Nation throne is his birthright, and by extension, all the things that come with it: respect, fear, status, as well as an unlimited supply of money. He doesn't feel like he ever has to work for or earn these things. They should be given to him automatically. Iroh, meanwhile, doesn't care about any of that. As I said, he doesn't care if someone passing by thinks lowly of him or if his status and wealth are gone. He is content with the life he has, whatever that may be. These implicit feelings become explicit later in Chapter 5 when Zuko takes to stealing things to get by. He steals a bunch of ornate teapots for Iroh and asks him if he likes them. Iroh poignantly replies, "The best tea tastes delicious, whether it comes in a porcelain pot or a tin cup. I know we've had some difficult times lately. We've had to struggle just to get by, but it's nothing to be ashamed of. There is a simple honor in poverty." A lot of this video is long Uncle Iroh quotes, but I can't help it. He drops such amazing, profound lines that they're all worth analyzing. With this one, there is a danger of misreading it though, I think. There is a way to read this line that nostalgizes poverty and makes it seem like a walk in the park. That's obviously not true. Poverty is an incredibly debilitating thing to deal with, one that can demonstrably deteriorate your physical and mental health. It's especially easy to brush it off when it's just a temporary condition, like it is here. These two have spent most of their lives living in luxury, and we know things turn out well for them. So it's easy to view this as a quaint little adventure. In reality, it can be a bleak condition, one that people are sometimes born into and often can't escape. But I think what Iroh is talking about is that there is honor in being content, as he's shown himself to be. There is an honor in working for your keep, honor in living life for what it is, and not the wealth and riches that you seek. And there is honor in being a good person who is not bringing harm to others. That's also what he means about the best tea tasting good, whether it comes in porcelain or tin. That's a perfect metaphor for what's happening to the two of them. They were once decorated in porcelain, but now they're forced to settle for tin. But it's what's inside that counts. Iroh is still content, and he is still a wonderful human being, no matter the clothes he wears or the place he calls home. All of this is what Zuko struggles with, at least for a while longer in the show. Which is why I think the way Iroh follows this up is so touching. Zuko tells Iroh that there is no honor without the Avatar, and Iroh finally gives him the bitter pill that even if he does capture the Avatar, there's no guarantee it will fix things and get them back to the way he wants them to be. Zuko coldly replies that in that case, there is no hope at all. This is when Iroh quickly interjects. No, Zuko, you must never give in to despair. Allow yourself to slip down that road and you surrender to your lowest instincts. In the darkest times, hope is something you give yourself. That is the meaning of inner strength. You'll have to forgive me because I struggle to get through this line without choking up. It particularly hits home for me if you'll allow me to get real for a moment. I've had a tough time recently, particularly financially, so I sort of understand the situation these two find themselves in. My family's been struggling, and with those copyright issues I mentioned earlier, trying to make the soak work to keep this dream going has become harder than ever. The pressure to earn a certain amount of money just to stay afloat and pay the bills had me feeling at a real low point, and there were times when I too felt the call of despair. That feeling of wanting to give up, of turning to the last resorts, it was strong. But somewhere along making this video, I returned to this line. And it may sound silly to some people, but it genuinely gave me hope. I think that's what's profound and so important about all good media, The Last Airbender being a great example of one. They speak to us in different ways, in different stages of our lives, and they give us hope, whether that's a TV show, a film, or a video essay. Ultimately, Uncle Iroh may be a fictional character, but the things he says and believes come from the real experiences and values of real people, of things either collectively or individually learned. So in the same way that I hope my video essays give you hope and inspiration and happiness, so too did the joyous journey of looking at Uncle Iroh throughout the series do for me. I felt like I was taking in life lessons from a wise elder who was reminding me that life is what you make it. I want to believe in myself, to have that hope that I will make it to the other side and come out stronger, and that's why I hold that Iroh line dear, and I hope it will stay with you too, that in the darkest of times, hope is something you give yourself. That is the meaning of inner strength. Now in the previous section, we spent a lot of time talking about Iroh in relation to Zuko, and that is hopefully understandable. Almost all of their time on screen is together, at least until Zuko joins Team Avatar in Book 3. So I also think we can't have a video analyzing Iroh without giving him his real title, not Uncle Iroh, but as a father to Zuko, and a father figure for several other people he encounters, maybe even us. If you need any convincing that both Zuko and Iroh feel this way about each other, in Book 3, when Zuko confronts the Father Lord about the evils of the Fire Nation, he gives him a moving speech about how the world hates the Fire Nation and that they've created a terrible world. He says we need to replace it with an era of peace and kindness, to which Ozai simply laughs and says, "Your uncle has gotten to you, hasn't he?" Zuko pauses and replies, "Yes, he has. After I leave here today, I'm gonna beg for his forgiveness. He's the one who's been a real father to me." For Iroh's part, he's pretty much always viewed Zuko as his son, and there's a really touching scene in Book 1 when Zuko is setting off to capture the Avatar at the North Pole. Iroh is giving Zuko some advice until Zuko tells him he doesn't need his wisdom right now. Iroh meekly says, "I'm sorry. I just nag you because, well, ever since I lost my son, I think of you as my own." I think both these scenes that we've discussed give us a good insight into Iroh as a father. He's wise and inspirational, but he's also a worrier. Here, after hugging Zuko goodbye, he tells him to remember his breath of fire and keep his hood up to keep his ears warm. I think we've all known parents like this. We don't know if he was always this way, but you can definitely imagine that after losing one son, Iroh wouldn't want anything to potentially take Zuko away from him, and so he nags and tries to protect Zuko wherever he can. But importantly, he's not overbearing. At every opportunity he can, Iroh lets Zuko make his own decisions. And we've already spoken a little bit about this in the section talking about destiny. It's not just that Iroh lets Zuko decide his own destiny, but he also lets him make his own path and choices. I think the best example of this is in Book 2, Chapter 5, in that episode with that moving conversation about despair and finding hope through inner strength. Towards the end of that episode, Zuko returns to their cave and tells Iroh that he's been thinking about their conversation from earlier, and the conclusion he's come to is that they no longer have anything to gain from traveling together, and that he has to find his own way. Iroh's response is so moving because he just quietly feels sad but accepts Zuko's decision. He doesn't say anything and simply lowers his head a few moments later. You can tell that he's wishing things could be different, that somehow he could guide Zuko to the right path, but he also doesn't want to force Zuko into anything. As we spoke about before, he knows how toxic it can be for other people to decide your path in life. And so, the only thing he does is stop Zuko before he leaves in order to give him the horse that they'd been traveling on. And that's it. Silently, the surrogate father and son part ways, and only after Zuko is gone does Iroh let his sadness show, hanging his head again and looking sad and resigned. But that's not the end of the story, of course. As Zuko begins to travel alone, we see a scene where Toph, herself having decided to split off after an argument with Katara, stumbles into meeting Iroh. The two share tea together and a lovely conversation where Iroh tells Toph that he's been secretly tracking his nephew. Toph asks, is he lost? And of course her question is literal. She doesn't know who Iroh is, and so she's wondering if his nephew just got separated by accident. Iroh replies to the metaphorical aspect of the question though, as he says, yes, a little bit. His life has recently changed and he's going through very difficult times. He's trying to figure out who he is, and he went away. I know he doesn't want me around right now, but if he needs me, I'll be there. I think this conversation sums up the wonderful philosophy Iroh brings to fatherhood. He's constantly imparting wisdom to Zuko, but he never forces his ideals on him. He's always trying to guide Zuko, but he never forces him to make any specific decision. He wants to be a presence in Zuko's life, but he also respects when Zuko wants to do his own thing. And he simply accepts that when he needs him, he'll be there and waiting. As the conversation is happening, Iroh pours Toph her tea, and she brings up the same grievance that she had with Team Avatar. She says that people see her and think she's weak and end up wanting to take care of her, but she can take care of herself by herself. Iroh, as you should have guessed by now, drops another pearl of wisdom in response. You sound like my nephew, always thinking you need to do things on your own without anyone's support. There is nothing wrong with letting the people who love you help you. And indeed, it takes Zuko a while to figure all this out without Iroh. Throughout the early stages of Book 3, he struggles on his own to figure out what is right and what is wrong, including one moment where he confronts a now imprisoned Iroh and tells him that he's lost and confused and needs his uncle's advice. But at this point, Iroh is still upset over Zuko's actions and just sits there giving him the silent treatment. But just like the incident when they parted ways in the Earth Kingdom, Iroh's seeming inaction isn't a true picture of what's going on. Because somehow, a few episodes later, someone gets a scroll to Zuko telling him he needs to learn about his grandfather's history. After Zuko learns what happened between Avatar Roku and Fire Lord Sozin, he confronts Iroh in jail again and says, "You sent this, didn't you?" Then demands to understand what it all means. That is when Iroh reveals that Zuko's maternal grandfather was Avatar Roku, and that he possesses within him the power to cleanse the sins of the Fire Nation and bring balance to the world. And really, it's not outlandish to believe that Iroh somehow got this scroll to Zuko, probably through some intermediary, because moments later, he pulls out this artifact that he'd been hiding in a stone in his prison cell somehow, so who knows how deep Iroh's connections run. In the end, Iroh's gentle parenting works. Zuko comes to his own conclusions about what is right and wrong, and as we already discussed, rebels against his father and the current Fire Nation ethos. After joining Team Avatar and redeeming himself, he eventually meets back up with his uncle, and in what is the most moving scene of the series, apologizes for all the shameful things he's done and begs for his uncle's forgiveness. When Iroh hugs him, Zuko says, "How can you forgive me so easily? I thought you'd be furious with me." To which Iroh simply replies, "I was never angry with you. I was sad because I was afraid you had lost your way, but you found it again, and you did it by yourself." And you can see the pure pride on his face when he says this. A fatherly pride that says, I did a good job raising this one. So now we've talked about Father Iroh, we need to talk about Daddy Iroh, because this man is relentless. We spoke earlier about Iroh having a great weakness for tea, but there's one more weakness he has. Women. Boy, does he love women. Now this video has already gone on very long, so for this last section, I'm just going to speed through the other facets of Iroh's personality that warrant mentioning. Chief among those is that anytime Iroh sees a woman, particularly a beautiful woman, and doubly particularly a young woman, he knows how to turn the charm on. In Book 2, he successfully woos this immigration officer lady who's initially kinda rude to them, but after one little compliment from Iroh, turns into a purring kitten, almost literally. We already mentioned the compliment he throws the lady while he's begging, but he's also got some love for the fortune teller lady who comes on to him. Of course, this is the episode where Iroh has his borderline weird obsession with the goth tracker lady June, who is voiced by none other than Commander Shepard herself, the legendary Jennifer Hale.
I'm Commander Shepard, and this is my favorite store on the Citadel.
There's also another young lady that Iroh actually has a very nice relationship with when he's in prison in the Fire Nation. This one isn't necessarily romantic, but it's definitely part of the trend. He's really nice to her, and she sneaks him in some good food to make his time in jail a little more bearable. In return, he warns her on the day of the Black Sun that it is better that you are not here this afternoon, and she gets the message. Of course, the jail leads us back to a theme we've explored earlier about weaponized incompetence. Because while he's in here, Iroh pretends to be a feeble old man, and in fact even acts like a crazed savage to throw off the warden from knowing what he's planning. It gives us this badass scene though, of seeing that Iroh is actually a beast when he wants to be, working out till he's looking swole as hell, and eventually busts out of prison by himself. I think that's a good demonstration of Iroh deciding his own destiny, not waiting for someone else to save him, but rather busting himself out of jail, assembling the White Lotus, and taking back Ba Sing Se while he leaves the rest to Team Avatar to sort out. And I think that's the note I want to end this lengthy video essay on, because like so much of what we've discussed, we can learn tons of lessons from Uncle Iroh. We are all nuanced, contradictory, flawed, goofy, and stupid sometimes, but we are capable of change, and we are capable of writing our own destinies. And I think back to that same quote again, that if you ever feel like that's not the case, that you're at an all-time low, and that despair is all you have, remember that in the darkest times, hope is something you give yourself. That is the meaning of inner strength, and that is just one of the many reasons why I love Uncle Iroh, and I hope you do too. Thank you for watching this video. I've already plugged my Patreon and all the ways you can support this channel, so instead, I'm just going to thank my current supporters, who I'm genuinely so grateful to. Whether that's those of you who watch these videos without ad block, or leave nice comments, or watch my Twitch streams, or indeed support me like my patrons do that you see on screen now, I am so thankful to have something as valuable as your time and energy. And money. Money's nice too. Thank you to everyone who makes Ahsoka a reality, and thank you to my editor Priscilla as well, who as always has done an amazing job with this video. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to see me explore next. I've mostly focused on animated media so far, specifically Studio Ghibli, but if you like this Avatar deep dive, I may do another one on a different character. Toph, for example, or a deep dive into a different show or film. Let me know in the comments, and your feedback always keeps me inspired and hopeful. But that's it for now. I hope I'll see you again very soon. Peace out and have a nice day.